Hey everybody, welcome back to another IT video. In this one we're going to be going over a little trip to Microcenter that we just did last week, me and my buddy Josh, and also shout out to Jackson who did a little B-roll filming for us. We're actually building Josh a gaming PC for the holidays, so we don't have footage of everything, but we got footage of what we could, and I'll fill in the rest the best I can. So let's get started. So we headed up to Microcenter, which is about an hour away from me, and we decided we were going to go into this with no real plan. We didn't want to have everything listed out in an order and just go and pick it out. We kind of wanted to figure it out when we got there. So we were going to see what we could piece together for $550 before taxes. So this had to include everything but case fans. Josh had 2 case fans from a previous build that he just did, so we could throw those in there to keep the cost down a little bit. Now, Josh's brother's main game is probably going to be Classic World of Warcraft. That's the game he's most excited for, but he also probably will get into some other PC gaming, so we wanted to build him something that'll play everything at 1080p with decent frame rates, even if it's at low settings. And we also wanted to have a little bit of an upgrade path in case he wanted to, upgrade in the future. So the first thing we did is we went to the case section, actually, which I know seems a little weird, but we kind of wanted to figure out what form factor we wanted to go with. We were thinking initially maybe an ITX build, just because it's a little bit easier to ship, takes up less space on his desk, whatever else. But looking at the options, it was pretty clear that wasn't going to fit our budget. So a standard ATX case it was, which is fine, no worries. So after we figured out the form factor, we decided to save the cases till the end and went to look at some hardware. And the first thing we actually looked at was a CPU. WoW is pretty CPU dependent, so we wanted something a little more than an Athlon chip. Those are a great price, but Microcenter actually had a Ryzen 5 1600 on sale for $80 with a cooler. So once we saw that, there was really no other options that weighed that much in terms of value. So that's what we ended up going with. So next thing we wanted to do was pick out a motherboard, and at this price point you pretty much just want to get the features you need at the cheapest price possible. So really all we needed was Wi-Fi and a decent B450 board. So we went with the Gigabyte B450M DS3H Wi-Fi, which could have just been called the B450 bare bones with Wi-Fi. I'm talking no I/O cover, no VM heat sinks, no bells and whistles. It's bare bones. The one thing that I was happy that it had was 4 RAM DIMMs, even though we only ended up using 2 of them so far. I think that's nice to have in case you want to upgrade RAM in the future. Some of the boards we looked at only had 2 RAM DIMMs. And he's also not going to do any sort of overclocking. He's not really interested in it, so we didn't really need a board that could, push the CPU to its fullest potential or anything like that. So not really a big deal. And we ended up picking that up for $62, which I think is a pretty good price because you don't have to include a Wi-Fi dongle or anything like that into it. Next up on our list was RAM. We wanted to try finding something on clearance, but there wasn't really anything. I really wanted a 3600 kit for this build, just because Ryzen obviously likes fast RAM. And we did find a 16 gig kit of G.Skill Ripjaw 3600 CL18 RAM for $63, which was actually pretty on par with 3200 megahertz RAM. So we decided to go with the 3600. The box didn't say Ryzen compatible, but we figured it would work out fine. So next up, we went and looked at GPUs, and there was really only 2 options that we had, and that was the 1650 Super and the RX 588 gig. The RX card was only $159 on sale, and the 1650 Supers were anywhere from $189, $199, somewhere in there, depending on the card, obviously. Now, the 1650 Super has a slight edge on the RX 580, but for the extra $40 or so, I don't really know if it's worth it. It's about 5-7% better in most games. But like I said, the games that he's interested in aren't really GPU dependent, so we weren't too worried about it, and I think an RX 580 will be plenty for him. However, I think if we could have afforded a 1660 Ti, that would have been a nice little upgrade, but to keep it to $550 with a $239 or so 1660 Ti rather, I didn't think we could really fit it in the budget. So we went with the RX 580. It's a Power Color Red Dragon 8 gig card, dual fans. Seems like a decent card, although the reviews aren't the best on it, but it should be good enough. So now all we had left was an SSD, a power supply, and a case. So with the SSD, we just went with the cheapest M.2 we could find that was big enough for an OS and a couple games. So we went with a 240 gig Kingston. It's only a SATA M.2. Not a big deal. I mean, NVMe is definitely going to be a little bit pricier. And this was only $32. So not bad. Don't have to worry about any cables running in the build. So keep everything clean. And I recommend he can get a 1 terabyte hard drive or even an SSD later if he fills that up. Not a huge deal. And SATA 3 is still fast enough. I mean, let's be real. For a $550 build, SATA 3 is good enough. So the power supply was between a 450 watt bronze modular power supply from EVGA, and that was $55, or a 500 watt 80 plus non-modular supply for $45. We ended up going with the 500 watt, although I'm not sure we needed it. With no overclocking, this system probably won't pull more than 400 watts, but you never know. It's nice to have a little bit of headroom. It's just a real bummer that it's not a modular supply, and the modular 500s kind of pushed a little bit too much into our budget, so we couldn't really afford that. However, we could pick a case that had a nice power supply shroud to kind of hide all that, and so that's what we were going to end up doing. So we went with the 500 watt just for a little bit more headroom. And the 500 watt was only an 80 plus efficiency, not a bronze, which, I mean, let's be honest, if you're building a budget PC, is the efficiency of your power supply that big of a deal? Probably not. So last thing we needed was a case to finish this off, and we looked at 4 or 5 cases from like $50 to $70, and when it comes to aesthetics, nothing really compared in that price range to the NZXT H510. It's a really popular case. Pretty much every Reddit build you see has an NZXT H510 or one of the variations of it. Oh well, though, it's a nice looking case. It's got decent cable management, and it has the full power supply shroud, so you're not going to see any of those ugly wires that are just hanging back there. And yeah, it's just a pretty good looking case. So even for a budget build, you can make something look nice inside that case. And for $71, I would have liked to spend maybe a little less on a case, but the build quality really tanks on anything under that $70 mark, really. Even under $90, kind of build quality really starts to go down. But this one was kind of like a nice balance. Still have tempered glass, still have the power supply shroud, still have good cable management routing, and it feels decent enough. The one thing is that our case did have a USB-C front connector, but our motherboard actually didn't have USB-C support. So that's kind of a bummer, but not really a big deal. I don't think his brother's planning on using USB-C for anything, so oh well. So now on to building this thing. It was pretty easy. I'm not going to do a full tutorial. I'll just throw up some B-roll of kind of what happened. We did run into 3 issues, though. The first, not really an issue, but some of you might think it's an issue when you see it. We actually put the power supply with the fan facing up just because we didn't know if it'd be on carpet. He has cats, etc. We don't know like the maintenance schedule for this PC. So we figured the less that it's sucking in from the outside, the better. So yeah, I mean, dusty power supplies can really wreak havoc eventually. So we put the fan facing up, and that was a conscious decision. We figured if thermals were bad, we could always switch it around, but the thermals were great after we did our stress testing, so it wasn't a big deal. The second problem was one of our standoffs was stripped from factory. I don't know, maybe it was a return case. So yeah, one of the standoffs was kind of stripped out, so we didn't really know what it was. I thought maybe it was that I forgot a standoff, but it turns out that the standoff was just stripped. So pulled the motherboard back out, swapped the standoff, easy enough. The last is kind of like the biggest bummer. Our RAM actually wouldn't run at 3600 megahertz. Doing our stress testing with IDA and Prime, we were getting memory errors, so we bumped it down to 3400 megahertz CL18. Everything worked out from there, had no fails. So, and I feel like 3400 megahertz CL18 RAM on a Ryzen 1600 and a $550 build is still pretty respectable. Now, unfortunately, it was pretty late at this point. This process took a while. We went to Microcenter at probably 3 o'clock, got there at 4 o'clock, was there till 6 o'clock, picking everything out, get home at 7, build the PC, which till about 9 o'clock, 9:30. And then from there, it was just kind of time to go. So we didn't get any benchmarking done. We did install Rust and played for an hour or so, and it was maintaining 65, 70 FPS at 1440p. Graphics settings at 2, which if you've played Rust, you know is pretty low, but even so, at 1440p, I feel like that's pretty respectable for an RX 580. And Rust is a very unoptimized game, so if it can play Rust at that, I'm pretty confident that it'll play any game at 1080p fairly well, even if you have to put it at low settings, which I don't find really a big deal. So the total came to just around 570 after tax, and I actually think it's a pretty good value build. I mean, it's got decent aesthetics, it runs really well, play every game, and building a $550 PC these days is getting a little bit harder and harder. So, for these budget builds, I think you really got to look at the total value factor other than like the hardware you're actually getting. So for the value, $550, I think we actually accomplished something pretty well, even, especially for not having extensive research, price matching, looking at every single avenue to get the cheapest price on a part. We just went to Microcenter, picked out our parts, put it together, and it worked. So, and like I said, he has a little bit of an upgrade path. He could eventually get like a 3600 and pop that in there. That wouldn't be a problem. He could probably even put a 5700 or 5700 XT or like a 2060 Super or something in there if he wanted to eventually. So, I mean, he's got some upgrade options as well. So, hope you guys enjoyed this little build story. I'd like to do a few more of these and hopefully get some better footage in the future. I mean, the boys were hanging out, so filming wasn't really the top priority. And shout out to Josh and Jackson for actually helping me out with this. And if you like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more like this in the future, go ahead and subscribe. I'm trying to make more content. Work's slowing down for me, so I should be able to crank out some content this winter. So, hope you guys have a good one. Take it easy.